My old teacher spent an hour humiliating me for dropping out of high school. The fork froze halfway to my mouth when I heard that voice, sharp, condescending, exactly as I remembered from 15 years ago. Well, well. If it isn't Jake Morrison. Mrs. Henderson stood beside my table at Romano's, her gray hair pulled into the same severe bun she'd worn when she taught my junior English class. Behind her loomed Mr. Garrett, my former calculus teacher, his arms crossed and that familiar disapproving frown etched across his face. Oh, I managed, setting down my fork. Hi, Mrs. Henderson. Mr. Garrett. I'd driven 3 hours back to Millbrook for my cousin's wedding tomorrow, hoping to grab a quiet dinner before the family chaos began. The last thing I expected was a reunion with the two teachers who'd made my final semester of high school absolutely miserable. So what brings our little dropout back to town? Mrs. Henderson's voice carried across the restaurant, loud enough that nearby diners glanced over curiously. Finally decide to get your GED. My stomach clenched. I'm here for a family wedding. How nice, she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. And what are you doing with yourself these days? Let me guess, odd jobs. Manual labor. Mr. Garrett chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. I always told you, Henderson. Some students just aren't cut out for academic success. Remember how he used to sleep in class? The familiar shame started creeping up my neck. I was 17 again, sitting in a guidance counselor's office while these same teachers explained why I'd never amount to anything if I left school. How I was throwing my life away and would end up flipping burgers forever. Actually, You know, Mrs. Henderson interrupted, settling uninvited into the chair across from me, we use you as a cautionary tale sometimes. When students talk about dropping out, we tell them about Jake Morrison. Bright kid, decent test scores, but no discipline. No follow-through. Mr. Garrett pulled up another chair, apparently settling in for the long haul. Such a waste of potential. Your parents must be so disappointed. Other diners were definitely staring now. An elderly couple at the next table had stopped pretending to read their menus. The hostess kept glancing over nervously. I remember that last parent conference, Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice growing louder and more theatrical. Your mother actually cried when we told her you were choosing to throw away your future. 17 years old and already giving up on life. That's not. And for what? Mr. Garrett leaned back in his chair, warming to his topic. Because school was too hard. Because you couldn't handle a little pressure. Real life doesn't care about your feelings, son. Real life requires work ethic. The words hit like physical blows. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. These people had no idea. No clue that the scared, struggling teenager they remembered had built something extraordinary from nothing. We actually had such high hopes for you freshman year, Mrs. Henderson said with mock sadness. But some people just aren't meant for success, I suppose. Some people take the easy way out and spend their whole lives regretting it. The easy way out. If they only knew what the last 15 years had actually looked like, 18-hour days, failed prototypes, maxed out credit cards, sleeping on couches while building something they believed in against impossible odds. I glanced at my Patek Philippe watch. 7:23 p.m. In approximately 1 hour, these two were about to learn exactly how wrong they'd been about Jake Morrison. You know what really bothers me about kids like you? Mr. Garrett leaned forward, his voice taking on that lecturing tone I remembered so well. You had every advantage. Good family, decent grades in my class, until you started slacking off senior year. But instead of pushing through like successful people do, you chose the coward's way out. Mrs. Henderson nodded sagely, like they were having some profound educational discussion instead of publicly humiliating someone in a crowded restaurant. I'll never forget that final meeting with Principal Davis. December 15th, wasn't it, Garrett? Right before winter break. Jake here just gave up. December 15th. She was right about the date, but wrong about everything else. That was the day my dad's construction business went under. The day we found out we'd lose the house by February. The day I realized my parents couldn't afford to keep supporting me through senior year when they were about to lose everything. Some students rise to challenges, Mr. Garrett continued, apparently oblivious to the growing audience around us. Others crumble at the first sign of real adversity. Guess which category you fell into? A young couple at the corner table was openly recording now, probably thinking this was some kind of social media content. The hostess, a girl who couldn't be more than 20, kept approaching our table and backing away, clearly wanting to intervene but not sure how. And the excuses, Mrs. Henderson laughed, though it wasn't a pleasant sound. Remember? Family financial problems. As if every family doesn't have money issues. My husband was laid off twice while I was getting my master's degree. Did I quit? Did I use that as an excuse to stop working toward my goals? She had no idea. No clue that family financial problems meant choosing between keeping me in school or keeping a roof over our heads. That it meant my little sister Emma eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week. That my dad, proud, hardworking Tom Morrison, had started having panic attacks because he couldn't provide for his family. The thing is, Mr. Garrett said, settling back in his chair like he was just getting started, failure follows people like you. It becomes a pattern. You quit once, you'll quit again. That's why statistics show that high school dropouts earn 60% less over their lifetimes. They're more likely to be unemployed, more likely to depend on government assistance. He was citing statistics about my demographic. To my face. In public. Now, don't get me wrong, Mrs. Henderson added with false sweetness, I'm sure you're doing fine. In your own way. There's nothing wrong with blue-collar work. Society needs ditch diggers too. My phone buzzed against my leg. A text from my assistant, * board meeting moved to 8 a.m. tomorrow. Also, TechCrunch wants to confirm the quote about the Morrison Foundation's $50 million education initiative. Should I send the press release? $50 million. That's what my company was donating to educational programs this year. More than these two would see in their combined lifetimes. I'd personally written a check last week, thinking about kids like I used to be, smart, capable, but stuck in impossible situations. You're awfully quiet, Jake, Mrs. Henderson observed, clearly enjoying herself. Nothing to say for yourself? No excuses this time. I looked up from my phone, meeting her eyes for the first time since this nightmare began. Around us, Romanos had gone unusually quiet. Even the kitchen staff seemed to be listening. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I was just thinking about something you said. About failure following people. Mrs. Henderson smiled triumphantly. Finally ready to admit. About patterns, I continued. You're absolutely right about patterns, Mrs. Henderson. Some people do repeat the same behaviors over and over again. The smile faltered slightly on her face. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus, my CFO, * Jake, the Millbrook District contract is ready for your signature. $2.3 million for the new STEM lab upgrades. Should I send it over, *? $2.3 million. Going to this exact school district. Funding that would probably pay both of their salaries for the next decade. Patterns, Mr. Garrett repeated, looking confused by the shift in conversation. What exactly are you trying to say? I'm saying you're right about people repeating behaviors, I said, sliding my phone face down on the table. Take this conversation, for example. How many other former students have you cornered like this? How many people have you publicly humiliated in restaurants? Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. We're having a perfectly civil conversation. Are we? I gestured around the restaurant. Because half the people in here have their phones out recording this civil conversation. That woman over there posted something to Facebook about 2 minutes ago. The hashtag teacher fail is probably trending in Millbrook right now. For the first time, both teachers glanced around nervously. The young couple in the corner gave a little wave, their phone camera still rolling. We're simply catching up with a former student, Mr. Garrett said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Sharing some perspective on the importance of education. Perspective. I nodded slowly. Like the perspective you shared with Tommy Chin when he dropped out junior year. Or Sarah Michaels when she got pregnant senior year. Do you remember what you told her in front of the whole class? Mrs. Henderson's face went pale. That's different. We were trying to help. You told her she was just another statistic. That she'd ruined her life and would probably be on welfare by 25. I kept my voice calm, conversational. Sarah runs 3 daycare centers now, by the way. Employs 42 people. She sent me a LinkedIn message last month about expanding into early childhood STEM programs. The lies came easily now, but they felt true in spirit. Kids like Sarah, like Tommy, like me, we'd all been written off by teachers who thought they could predict our futures based on our worst moments. How would you possibly know? Mr. Garrett started. Because people talk, Mr. Garrett. Because this town is smaller than you think, and your reputation is bigger than you realize. I took a sip of water, letting that sink in. Did you know that Romano's owner, Mike Costello, was also one of your students? Class of '98. Mike emerged from behind the bar as if summoned, wiping his hands on his apron. He'd been watching this whole scene unfold with growing concern. Everything okay over here? Mike asked, but his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Just fine, Mike. Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Garrett were just telling me about their teaching philosophy. The one where they publicly shame former students. Mike's jaw tightened. These your old teachers, Jake. The very ones. Ha. Mike crossed his arms, suddenly looking a lot more intimidating than a restaurant owner had any right to. You know, I've been meaning to review some of the catering contracts we do with the school district. Funny how things work out. Mrs. Henderson shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. We came over here to have a friendly conversation. Friendly? The elderly woman at the next table finally spoke up, her voice sharp with indignation. Honey, I've been teaching Sunday school for 30 years, and what you two did to that young man was anything but friendly. It was cruel. Absolutely cruel, her husband agreed. Public humiliation. In my day, teachers had more class. A murmur of agreement rippled through the restaurant. The hostess was now openly filming from behind her podium. My phone buzzed a 3rd time. Another text, this one from an unknown number, *, is this really Jake Morrison from Morrison Tech? My friend posted a video and OMG if this is really you, these teachers have no idea what they just did to themselves, *. The internet was faster than I'd expected. The video was already going viral. I could see it in real time, notifications pinging on my phone every few seconds, the view count climbing in the corner of my screen where someone had tagged at Morrison Tech in a Twitter post. 47,000 views in the last 10 minutes. You know what's fascinating about social media? I said, holding up my phone so they could see the screen. Information travels so much faster than it used to. Back when I was in your classes, if a teacher humiliated a student, maybe their family found out. Maybe a few friends. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone from pale to gray. What are you? But now. I scrolled through the comments streaming in. Now we have people sharing videos in real time. Look at this, at Millbrook High already has 3 people tagging them. Someone posted this in the Teachers Behaving Badly Facebook group. Oh, and here's a fun one. I turned the screen toward them, showing a comment from someone named Jennifer Walsh, * OMG these are my old teachers too. Henderson told me I'd never get into college because I had ADHD. I'm a pediatric surgeon now. What absolute garbage humans, *. Mr. Garrett grabbed for my phone. You need to delete that. Right now. I pulled it back smoothly, not missing the desperation in his voice. Delete what? The truth. The documentation of this conversation that you initiated. This is taken out of context, Mrs. Henderson hissed, finally seeming to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. People don't understand. What context makes this okay? Mike Costello stepped closer to our table, his voice carrying the authority of someone who controlled the space we were sitting in. Because I heard the whole thing, and I'm trying to understand what context makes it appropriate for 2 grown adults to ambush someone during dinner. The restaurant had transformed into something resembling a courtroom. Other diners had stopped eating entirely, some openly filming, others whispering among themselves. A woman near the window was on her phone, probably calling someone to tell them about the drama unfolding at Romano's. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Rebecca Torres, my head of PR, * Jake, whatever's happening in Millbrook, it's hitting national education Twitter. Someone identified you in a viral video. Should I prepare a statement? * National education Twitter. Christ. This was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. Listen, Mr. Garrett said, his voice taking on a pleading quality I'd never heard from him before. This has gotten out of hand. We were trying to. Trying to what? I leaned forward, genuinely curious. Finish the job you started 15 years ago. Make sure I really understood my place in the world. Mrs. Henderson was scrolling frantically on her own phone now, probably seeing the same videos I was. Jake, you have to understand. We never meant, we were educators, we were trying to teach you about consequences. By humiliating a teenager who was working 2 jobs to help his family avoid homelessness. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. By telling my parents their son was worthless in front of half the faculty. The restaurant went dead quiet. That's what good teaching looks like to you. Public shame. Breaking down a kid who was already drowning. I could feel 15 years of suppressed anger rising in my chest. Do you have any idea what my life was like that December? Any clue what my family was going through? Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Of course you don't, I continued. Because you never asked. You just saw a statistic. Another dropout to add to your cautionary tales. My phone lit up with an incoming call, board member, Patricia Mills. Patricia Mills. The chairwoman of my company's board, former Secretary of Education, and coincidentally, the most powerful voice in educational policy reform in the country. This was about to get much worse for them. I declined Patricia's call, but not before Mrs. Henderson caught a glimpse of the name on my screen. Her face went from gray to green. Patricia Mills, she whispered. That's the former Secretary of Education. Yes, I said simply. She calls sometimes. The weight of that statement hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I could practically see the gears turning in their heads, trying to reconcile the failure they remembered with someone who casually received calls from education policy royalty. Mr. Garrett's voice came out as a croak. Why would Patricia Mills be calling you? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, * saw the video. Board meeting moved to emergency session, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This affects the Millbrook contract, *. The Millbrook contract. $2.3 million hanging in the balance, and these 2 idiots had no idea they just potentially torpedoed their entire district's future. Jake, Mrs. Henderson said, her condescending tone replaced by something approaching panic. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. We didn't mean to. Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding, I agreed. But not the kind you think. Another notification popped up. This one made my stomach drop, * at Education Week just picked up the story. Reporter wants comment within the hour, *. Education Week. The most respected publication in American education. When they covered something, every school administrator, board member, and policymaker in the country paid attention. What do you do, Jake? The question came from Mike Costello, who was still standing protectively near our table. Because I'm getting the feeling these 2 just made a very expensive mistake. Mrs. Henderson shot him a venomous look. This is none of your business. Actually, it kind of is, Mike interrupted. See, Jake's family and my family go way back. I remember when his dad's business went under. I remember Jake working doubles at the hardware store to help pay rent. I also remember these 2, he pointed directly at the teachers, standing up at a school board meeting and calling him a cautionary tale about poor work ethic. The blood drained from Mr. Garrett's face. That wasn't. December 18, 2008, Mike continued relentlessly. 3 days after Jake officially withdrew. You made a whole presentation about at-risk students and used his situation as your primary example. His parents were sitting in the front row. I'd forgotten Mike was there that night. Hell, I'd forgotten about that meeting entirely, but the shame came flooding back instantly. My parents, sitting there while their son was dissected like a lab specimen in front of the whole community. That presentation, I said slowly, pieces clicking into place, was that part of your application for the district's Teacher Excellence Award? Mrs. Henderson's silence was answer enough. Unbelievable. I started laughing, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. You literally built your career advancement on my failure. Used my family's worst moment as proof of your educational insights. My phone rang again. This time it was Marcus, my CFO. I answered on speaker. Jake, we've got a problem. The Millbrook video is everywhere, and Patricia Mills wants the board to review any contracts with that district. Also, Marcus's voice carried a note of barely contained excitement. Forbes just called. They want to do an emergency podcast about educational bias and entrepreneurial success. Something about the Morrison effect. Mrs. Henderson made a small choking sound. The Morrison effect? I asked, genuinely curious despite everything. Apparently some researcher at Stanford has been tracking successful entrepreneurs who were written off by their high school teachers. The preliminary data suggests there's a correlation between early institutional rejection and later innovation success. They want to name it after you. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. These 2 hadn't just humiliated a former student, they'd accidentally made themselves the poster children for everything wrong with traditional education. Mr. Garrett was frantically typing on his phone now, probably trying to do damage control. Too late for that. Marcus, I said, still on speaker, what's our current annual revenue? Just crossed $847 million this quarter. We're projecting to hit $1 billion by year end. The restaurant went dead silent except for the sound of Mrs. Henderson's chair scraping as she stumbled backward. $847 million. The dropout they'd spent an hour humiliating ran a company worth nearly $1 billion. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the chaos erupting around me, remind me what we're spending on educational initiatives this year. Across all programs? About $127 million. The Morrison Foundation accounts for most of that, but we've got the coding bootcamps, the rural STEM labs, and those teacher training programs in underserved districts. Mrs. Henderson gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. $127 million spent on education, more than their entire district's annual budget. And the Millbrook contract specifically? I continued, watching their faces carefully. That's the $2.3 million STEM upgrade, plus the $890,000 teacher training initiative. Total package is just over $3.2 million. Honestly, Jake, it's one of our smaller commitments, but the optics right now. Mr. Garrett's phone slipped from his trembling hands, clattering onto the restaurant floor. The sound made half the dining room jump. I understand completely, Marcus. Send Patricia my regards, and tell the board I'll join the emergency session as soon as I finish dinner. I hung up, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. The young couple in the corner had stopped recording, probably realizing they'd stumbled onto something much bigger than viral content. The elderly woman who defended me earlier was whispering urgently to her husband, pointing at her phone screen. Someone had clearly Googled Morrison Tech during the conversation. Jake. Mrs. Henderson's voice came out as barely a whisper. We had no idea. No idea about what? I asked pleasantly, cutting into my chicken marsala like nothing had happened. No idea that the worthless dropout might have made something of himself? Or no idea that your little performance tonight was being broadcast to the internet? A notification chimed on my phone, a news alert from the local paper, *, Millbrook teachers confront dropout in viral video, tech CEO connection unconfirmed. *. Oh, look at that, I said, showing them the headline. Sarah Chen from the Millbrook Gazette wants to confirm some details. Should I call her back now, or would you prefer to give your side of the story first? Sarah Chen. Mr. Garrett went rigid at the name. That's Tommy Chen's little sister, he said hoarsely. The student you mentioned earlier. Actually, Tommy's doing great, thanks for asking. His logistics company handles our West Coast distribution now. $47 million in revenue last year. I took another bite of dinner. Sarah covers education policy for 3 different publications. She's been following our foundation's work pretty closely. Mrs. Henderson was scrolling through her phone frantically now, probably seeing the same thing I was, the story spreading across education Twitter like wildfire. Someone had connected the dots between the viral video and Morrison Tech's massive educational investments. This could destroy us, she breathed, not seeming to realize she'd spoken aloud. Destroy you? I set down my fork and looked at her directly. How dramatic. You're both tenured, aren't you? Protected by the union. The court of public opinion doesn't care about tenure, Mr. Garrett said bitterly. Once this gets picked up by the major outlets. Once what gets picked up? I asked innocently. Your honest assessment of a former student. Your professional educational insights. I thought you were just sharing perspective. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, *, Mr. Morrison, this is Superintendent Davis. We need to talk immediately. Please call me, *. Superintendent Davis. He'd been the principal back when I was in school, the same man who'd sat silently while these 2 teachers destroyed my parents in that board meeting 15 years ago. I showed them the message. Looks like your boss wants to chat. Mrs. Henderson buried her face in her hands. This is a nightmare. No, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant. A nightmare is being 17 years old, watching your father cry because he can't afford to keep you in school, and having your teachers tell the whole town that you're a worthless quitter who'll never amount to anything. The weight of those words settled over our table like a shroud. A nightmare is working 16-hour days at minimum wage jobs while your former teachers use your story as an example of failure at faculty meetings. Mr. Garrett opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. This? I gestured around the restaurant, at the phone's recording, at the viral video spreading across social media. This is just consequences. My phone lit up with another call, this time from a number I recognized immediately. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the current principal of Millbrook High and someone I'd worked with extensively through the Morrison Foundation's rural education initiatives. She had no idea I was her hometown's infamous dropout. I answered on speaker. Jake, I'm so sorry to bother you on a Saturday evening, but we have an urgent situation brewing with our partnership. Dr. Rodriguez's voice was tight with stress. There's some kind of viral video involving our staff, and the board is in emergency session. They're talking about suspending our entire technology program pending investigation. Mrs. Henderson's face went ashen. The technology program she was referring to was her department, the one Mrs. Henderson had been promoted to head just 2 years ago. What kind of investigation? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Something about inappropriate conduct toward former students. The details are still unclear, but board member Patricia Mills called personally. She said Morrison Tech might be reconsidering all active contracts with districts that can't maintain professional standards. Patricia hadn't wasted any time. The emergency board meeting I'd been invited to wasn't just about reviewing the Millbrook contract, it was about making an example of what happened when educators forgot their basic humanity. Dr. Rodriguez, I said carefully, what do you know about the teachers involved? 2 veteran faculty members, Henderson and Garrett. Both have been with the district for over 20 years. Henderson just won the State Excellence in STEM Education Award last month. The award she'd probably won partly based on the technology upgrades my company had funded. The irony was suffocating. Mrs. Henderson was frantically shaking her head at me, mouthing, please, over and over. Mr. Garrett had gone completely still, like a deer caught in headlights. Dr. Rodriguez, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering. In your professional opinion, do Henderson and Garrett represent the values you want associated with Millbrook High? A long pause. Jake, why are you asking? Do you know something about this situation? The restaurant had gone pin-drop quiet again. Even the kitchen staff had stopped clattering dishes, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. I'm asking because Morrison Tech has invested heavily in your district based on trust. Trust that our partner schools are led by educators who believe in every student's potential. Of course we believe that. It's fundamental to everything we do. Dr. Rodriguez sounded genuinely confused. Jake, what exactly happened in this video? I looked directly at Mrs. Henderson, watching her silent plea turn to resignation. She knew what was coming. Two teachers spent the last hour publicly humiliating someone they believed to be a failure. They called him a cautionary tale, mocked his family's financial struggles, and suggested he'd amount to nothing more than manual labor. I kept my voice level, professional. They did this loudly, in a crowded restaurant, while being recorded. Dr. Rodriguez's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. Please tell me you're exaggerating. I'm not. And Dr. Rodriguez? The person they were humiliating was me. The silence that followed lasted at least 30 seconds. I could hear her breathing, probably trying to process the implications of what I just told her. Jake, you're from Millbrook. Her voice was barely a whisper. Born and raised. Class of 2009, well, I would have been, if I hadn't dropped out senior year because my family was about to lose our house. Oh my god. The pieces were clicking together for her now. Henderson and Garrett were teaching here in 2009. They would have been your teachers. They were. And tonight, they decided to finish what they started 15 years ago. My phone started buzzing with notifications. The story was accelerating beyond anything I'd anticipated. Local news, education blogs, business publications. Someone had leaked my identity to the press, and the narrative was writing itself. Billionaire dropout confronted by teachers who called him a failure. Mrs. Henderson suddenly stood up, swaying slightly. I need some air, she mumbled, and rushed toward the exit. But Mike Costello stepped smoothly into her path. Actually, ma'am, I think you need to stay right here until this gets sorted out, he said politely but firmly. Wouldn't want anyone to think you were running from accountability. The trap was closing, and everyone in the restaurant could feel it. Dr. Rodriguez was still on the line, her silence stretching uncomfortably long. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone realizing their career might be hanging in the balance. Jake, I need to understand exactly what happened here. Can you walk me through it? Mrs. Henderson had returned to the table, Mike's gentle but firm guidance making it clear she wasn't leaving until this resolved. Her face was blotchy red now, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. They approached my table uninvited, I began, keeping my tone factual. Mrs. Henderson immediately asked if I was back to finally get my GED. When I mentioned I was here for a family wedding, Mr. Garrett laughed and said I was a cautionary tale they used to warn current students about dropping out. Jesus, Dr. Rodriguez breathed. They told me my parents must be disappointed. That I probably do manual labor or odd jobs. Mrs. Henderson said they used me as an example of wasted potential. I glanced at the two teachers, both now staring at their hands. They spent considerable time discussing my family's financial situation in 2008, suggesting that other families manage money problems without their children giving up on life. Mr. Garrett finally looked up. Dr. Rodriguez, you have to understand, we had no idea who Jake had become. Stop talking, Richard. Dr. Rodriguez's voice cut like a blade. Just stop talking right now. The use of his first name made him flinch visibly. Jake, I'm driving to Romano's right now. Don't go anywhere, don't hang up. I need to see this situation firsthand. I heard a car door slam through the phone. And Jake? I am mortally embarrassed right now. This is not who we are as a district. Actually, Dr. Rodriguez, this is exactly who you are as a district, I said quietly. This is who you were 15 years ago, and apparently, this is who you still are today. A notification popped up on my phone, a Twitter alert that made my stomach clench. Someone had found the footage from that 2008 school board meeting Mike had mentioned. The local government website had archived video going back 20 years, and internet detectives worked fast. The tweet read, * found the original 2008 board meeting video. These same teachers literally presented a slideshow about it Morrison Tech CEO when he was 17, calling him at risk, while his parents watched. This is sick. #Millbrook fail *. The video already had 15,000 views. Mrs. Henderson was reading the same thing on her phone. Oh god, they found the presentation. What presentation? Dr. Rodriguez's voice sharpened. I pulled up the archived video on my phone. There it was, December 18, 2008. Agenda Item 7, Identifying and Addressing At-Risk Student Behaviors, presented by Catherine Henderson and Richard Garrett. Dr. Rodriguez, are you familiar with the presentation your teachers gave to the school board on December 18, 2008? I wasn't principal then, I was still teaching in Sacramento. What presentation? I hit play and held the phone closer to the speaker. Even through the tinny audio, Mrs. Henderson's voice from 15 years ago came through clearly. Student JM represents a classic case of avoidance behavior when faced with academic pressure. Despite adequate intellectual capacity, he chose the path of least resistance when confronted with senior year expectations. Dr. Rodriguez's car engine cut off abruptly. They're discussing a minor by name in a public meeting. They used my initials, but everyone knew exactly who they meant. My parents were sitting in the front row. The memory felt fresh now, raw in a way I hadn't expected. They had graphs, Dr. Rodriguez. Statistical projections about my likely life outcomes. Mr. Garrett was shaking his head frantically. The initials were supposed to protect confidentiality. In a town of 3,800 people where everyone knew exactly which student had just dropped out. I laughed bitterly. Real bulletproof anonymity there, Mr. Garrett. My phone buzzed with a call from Marcus again. I answered without taking it off speaker. Jake, we've got a situation. The Stanford researcher I mentioned earlier. Dr. Patricia Kim. She's been following this story and wants to interview you tonight for her study on educational bias. Marcus sounded excited despite the chaos. But more importantly, 3 major news outlets are running with this story. CNN, Washington Post, and 60 Minutes all called in the last 10 minutes. Mrs. Henderson made a small whimpering sound. Also, Marcus continued, our legal team wants to know if you intend to pursue any action against the district or individuals involved. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I hadn't actually considered legal action. Public humiliation had seemed like enough. But now, with national media attention building and our company's reputation potentially at stake. Tell legal I'll call them tomorrow, I said finally. Right now, I just want to finish my dinner in peace. Dr. Rodriguez's voice came through my phone, tight with barely controlled panic. Jake, I just pulled into Romano's parking lot. I can see the news vans. The news vans. I looked toward the restaurant's front windows and saw the bright lights already setting up in the parking lot. Someone had leaked my location faster than I'd expected. Dr. Rodriguez, when you come in, you might want to use the back entrance, I suggested. Unless you want to answer questions about how your district treats former students. Mrs. Henderson was hyperventilating now, her breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. My career is over. 23 years of teaching, and it's over because of one conversation. One conversation. The elderly woman from the neighboring table had apparently heard enough. She stood up, all 5 feet of her, and pointed an arthritic finger at Mrs. Henderson. Honey, I've been sitting here for 2 hours watching you systematically destroy a young man's dignity. That wasn't conversation, that was cruelty. Her husband nodded vigorously. We raised 4 children and sent them all through public school. Never seen anything like this behavior from educators. Mr. Garrett looked up desperately. Ma'am, you don't understand the context. The context, the woman interrupted, is that you're both bullies with teaching degrees. My granddaughter goes to Millbrook High, and if this is how you treat people, I'll be calling the school board myself. My phone lit up with an incoming call from Patricia Mills. The board meeting was starting early. I need to take this, I said, answering. Patricia. Jake, we've moved the emergency session up. The video has hit Education Secretary Martinez's desk, and she's asking questions about federal funding to districts with documented discrimination issues. The Education Secretary. This had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. Mrs. Henderson heard the name and actually slumped in her chair. Federal involvement meant this wasn't just about local embarrassment anymore, this was about the survival of the entire district. How much federal funding does Millbrook receive annually? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. According to our preliminary research, about $847,000 in Title I funds, plus another $200,000 in STEM grants. If those get pulled pending investigation. $1 million in federal funding. Combined with our company's $3.2 million contract, Millbrook was looking at losing over $4 million because 2 teachers couldn't resist humiliating someone they thought was powerless. Patricia, I'll join the call in 5 minutes. And Patricia? Make sure someone's recording everything. I have a feeling we're going to want documentation of this decision. I hung up and looked across the table at 2 educators who had just accidentally triggered a federal investigation into their own district. Dr. Rodriguez walked through Romano's front door, having apparently decided to brave the media gauntlet. Her face was grim as she approached our table, nodding curtly to Mike Costello. Mr. Morrison, she said formally, extending her hand. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances. So do I, Dr. Rodriguez. Though I have to say, this has been educational in its own way. She winced at the word choice, then looked directly at Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Garrett. Catherine. Richard. You're both suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Mrs. Henderson's face crumpled. Amanda, please. It's Dr. Rodriguez, and no. What you 2 did tonight represents the worst possible failure of professional judgment. She turned back to me. Mr. Morrison, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that immediate action is being taken. Outside, I could see more news vans arriving. The story was growing legs faster than anyone could control it. My phone showed 17 missed calls from reporters in the last 10 minutes alone. Dr. Rodriguez, I said quietly, I think you should know, this is about to get much bigger. The Federal Education Department is now involved, and our board is considering this a test case for future educational partnerships. Her face went pale. Test case for what? Whether districts that tolerate systematic bias against struggling students deserve continued private and federal investment. The implications hit her immediately. We weren't just talking about Millbrook anymore, we were talking about setting a precedent that could affect education funding nationwide. Mr. Garrett finally found his voice. Jake, surely there's some way to resolve this quietly. Some way to avoid destroying the whole district over one mistake. I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the 17-year-old boy who'd sat in his office while being told he'd never amount to anything. Mr. Garrett, I said finally, you're absolutely right. This should be resolved quietly. Just like you should have handled my situation quietly 15 years ago, instead of turning it into a public presentation for your career advancement. That was different. No, I interrupted. It really wasn't. My phone buzzed with a text from someone I hadn't expected to hear from, Jake, it's Emma. Holy shit, is this really happening? Mom just called crying, she saw the news, Emma. My little sister, now 31 and a pediatric nurse in Portland. She'd been 12 when I dropped out, old enough to remember the shame that had consumed our family during those awful months. I quickly typed back, it's happening. Are Mom and Dad okay? Dad's been pacing the living room for an hour. Mom keeps saying she should have protected you better back then. Jake, I remember that school board meeting. I remember how those teachers made you sound like some kind of criminal, Mrs. Henderson noticed me texting and leaned forward desperately. Jake, please. Think about this rationally. If the federal investigation goes forward, it won't just hurt us, it'll devastate the entire community. Students will lose programs, teachers will lose jobs, families will be affected. You mean like how my family was affected when you decided to make an example of us? I looked up from my phone. Funny how community impact suddenly matters when it's your community at risk. Dr. Rodriguez was fielding calls now, pacing near the restaurant's entrance while trying to manage what was clearly a full-blown crisis. I caught fragments of her conversations, media containment strategy. Board meeting in 30 minutes. Federal liaison wants documentation. Another text from Emma, Jake, I need to tell you something. After you left school, I used to hear kids talking about you in the hallways. Henderson would use your story in her classes for years. She'd tell students, don't end up like Jake Morrison when they complained about homework, asterisk. My blood went cold. For years. Not just that one board presentation, she'd been using my failure as a teaching tool for years after I left. Mrs. Henderson, I said quietly, setting my phone down. My sister just told me something interesting. About how you used my story in your classroom. For years after I graduated. Her face went white. That's not. I mean, I may have occasionally referenced. Don't end up like Jake Morrison, I quoted. Ring any bells? Mr. Garrett shot her a horrified look. Catherine, tell me you didn't actually say that to students. Her silence was answer enough. Jesus Christ, Catherine, he whispered. Do you have any idea what that could mean legally? Using a former student's name as a negative example in front of minors. My phone rang, Patricia Mills again. Jake, we need to accelerate timeline. A reporter from Education Week just informed me they have documentation going back 5 years of these teachers using your specific case in presentations at education conferences. This isn't isolated misconduct, this is systematic exploitation of a minor's personal information. Education conferences. They've been touring my story across the region, building their professional reputations on the detailed humiliation of a struggling teenager. 5 years of conferences, I said aloud, watching Mrs. Henderson's face crumble completely. Dr. Rodriguez ended her call and returned to our table, her expression grim. Mr. Morrison, I've just been informed by our district's legal counsel that there may be additional complications beyond tonight's incident. The conferences, I said simply. She nodded. We're looking at potential violations of FERPA, possible defamation issues, and misuse of confidential student information. The board is calling an emergency meeting for 9 p.m. Outside Romano's, I could see the crowd growing. Not just news vans now, but people, parents, students, community members drawn by the social media storm. Someone had set up what looked like a protest sign reading, Fire Henderson. Mrs. Henderson buried her face in her hands. My daughter goes to school here. My grandchildren. How am I going to face them? For the first time all evening, I felt something resembling sympathy for her. Then I remembered being 17, walking through town while everyone whispered about the Morrison family's failures. Mrs. Henderson, I said, how did you think my family faced this community after your presentation? After years of you telling students not to end up like me? The question hung in the air as my phone buzzed with one final notification, a text from my mother, asterisk honey, your father wants to know if you need us to drive down there. We love you. We've always been proud of you. Always, asterisk. 23 years later, and my parents were still trying to protect me from these teachers. It was time to end this. I stood up from the table, decision crystallizing in my mind. Dr. Rodriguez, I need to make something very clear. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about protecting other students from experiencing what I did. My phone showed 127 missed calls now. The story had reached critical mass, hashtag Millbrookgate was trending nationally, with over 400,000 tweets in the past hour. Someone had created a timeline documenting every conference where Henderson and Garrett had presented my case, complete with photos of their PowerPoint slides. Jake, please, Mrs. Henderson whispered. I have 3 years until retirement. My pension, my healthcare. And Tommy Chen's sister Sarah has 2 kids and a mortgage, I replied evenly. Didn't stop you from telling her graduating class she'd probably end up another welfare statistic when she got pregnant. Dr. Rodriguez looked stricken. They said that to a pregnant student. Class of 2010, Mike Costello confirmed grimly. I remember because Sarah's mom came in here crying afterward. Sweet kid, honor roll student, one mistake and they destroyed her in front of everyone. My phone rang again, this time showing Rebecca Torres, PR. Rebecca, you're on speaker. Jake, we have a problem. Someone leaked the Morrison Foundation's donor database to a blogger. They're cross-referencing our educational grants with districts that employ Henderson and Garrett. Her voice was tight with controlled panic. Turns out we've indirectly funded their salaries for 7 years through various programs. 7 years. Nearly $500,000 of my money had gone toward paying the salaries of people who'd spent a decade using my personal trauma as career advancement material. Mrs. Henderson made a choking sound. We never knew the money was connected to you. Of course you didn't. Because you never bothered learning what happened to the students you wrote off. I looked directly at her. Did you know that 73% of our foundation's grants go to programs supporting at-risk students? Kids from families facing exactly the situation mine did. Mr. Garrett's voice came out as a croak. Jake, if there's any way to make this right. Actually, there is. I pulled up my contact list and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago. Dr. Patricia Kim at Stanford. This is Jake Morrison. I understand you've been researching the correlation between educational bias and entrepreneurial success. Dr. Kim's voice came through crystal clear on speaker, Mr. Morrison. I've been following tonight's story with great interest. Your case perfectly illustrates the phenomenon I've been documenting. I'd like to discuss participating in your study. Specifically, I want to document how systematic educator bias affects student outcomes. I kept my eyes on Henderson and Garrett. I think it's time someone created an evidence-based framework for identifying and addressing this kind of institutional failure. That would be groundbreaking, Dr. Kim said excitedly. With your platform and our research, we could fundamentally change how districts handle struggling students. Mrs. Henderson was shaking her head frantically. Jake, you can't seriously be planning to make us the subject of a national research study. Why not? You made me the subject of your presentations for 10 years. Turnabout seems fair. Through the restaurant's windows, I could see the crowd outside had grown to nearly 200 people. Parents holding signs, students with phones raised, local reporters interviewing anyone willing to talk. The Millbrook community was fracturing in real time. Dr. Rodriguez ended another hushed phone conversation and returned, her face ashen. Mr. Morrison, I've just spoken with our board chair. The district is prepared to offer a formal public apology and immediate termination of both Henderson and Garrett. That's a start, I said. But Dr. Rodriguez, this goes deeper than two bad teachers. This is about a system that rewards educators for destroying vulnerable students. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, * board meeting starting in 5 minutes. Patricia wants your recommendation on the Millbrook contract. Also, 3 other districts have now requested Morrison Foundation reviews of their at-risk student programs. This is becoming a movement, *. 3 other districts. Word was spreading that supporting struggling students wasn't just morally right, it was financially essential. Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Garrett, I said, standing up and leaving money on the table for my untouched dinner. You spent 15 years believing your assessment of me was correct. Tonight, you discovered you were catastrophically wrong. The question now is, how many other students did you misread? How many other futures did you write off? I headed toward the door, where Dr. Rodriguez waited with obvious dread about facing the media circus outside. This conversation isn't over, I called back to the teachers. But the next one will be in federal court. The restaurant's back exit led to an alley where Dr. Rodriguez had parked, trying to avoid the media circus out front. But as we stepped into the cool night air, I realized the crowd had found us anyway. Phone cameras flashed as someone shouted, "There he is. That's Jake Morrison. Mr. Morrison. Can you comment on the federal investigation?" A reporter thrust a microphone toward my face. Dr. Rodriguez stepped protectively in front of me. No comments at this time. The district will issue a formal statement tomorrow. Dr. Rodriguez, is it true that Millbrook has been using confidential student information at education conferences for over a decade? Another voice from the growing crowd. Her face went pale. We're reviewing all presentations made by district personnel. My phone buzzed with an urgent call from Patricia Mills. I answered as we pushed through the crowd toward Dr. Rodriguez's car. Jake, Emergency Development. Secretary Martinez just called personally. The Department of Education is launching a formal Title IX investigation into Millbrook's treatment of at-risk students. This is now a federal civil rights case. Title IX. My legs nearly gave out. What started as a humiliating dinner confrontation had escalated into a federal civil rights investigation. Patricia, what does that mean practically? It means Millbrook could lose all federal funding pending investigation. We're talking about a complete financial audit going back 15 years. Every grant, every program, every dollar they've received while these practices were ongoing. Dr. Rodriguez heard enough to stop walking entirely. Federal audit, she whispered, leaning against her car. Oh God, we're finished. A new voice cut through the crowd noise, familiar, warm, and completely unexpected. Excuse me, coming through. That's my son you're harassing. Mom. My mother had driven 3 hours in the dark, probably breaking every speed limit, to get here. Dad was right behind her, his face set in the same protective expression I remembered from my childhood. Mom, what are you doing here? I wrapped her in a hug, suddenly 17 again. What am I doing here? My boy is on the national news being ambushed by the same teachers who tortured our family 15 years ago. Where else would I be? Dad shook hands with Dr. Rodriguez, his grip firm enough to make her wince slightly. Tom Morrison. I believe we met once before, December 18, 2008. School board meeting where your staff decided to publicly dissect my son's personal situation. Mr. Morrison, I wasn't principal then. But these teachers were your employees, Mom interrupted, her teacher voice cutting through the chaos. Catherine Henderson and Richard Garrett have been spreading lies about my son for 15 years, and you let them. Patricia's voice crackled through my still-connected phone. Jake, are you there? We need your decision on the Millbrook contracts within the hour. The board is voting on whether to establish this as precedent for all future educational partnerships. All future partnerships. Morrison Tech worked with over 200 school districts nationwide. If we made Millbrook's behavior a disqualifying factor for funding, it would send shockwaves through the entire education system. Mom, Dad, I need 5 minutes to handle this call. I walked a few steps away, but kept the phone on speaker so they could hear. After everything our family had been through, they deserved to witness this moment. Patricia, what's the board's recommendation? Unanimous termination of all Millbrook contracts, effective immediately. But Jake, 3 board members want to go further. They're proposing the Morrison Standard, a formal review process for any district with documented bias incidents. The Morrison Standard. Named after the dropout they'd written off as worthless. Behind me, I could hear Dad talking quietly to Dr. Rodriguez. You want to know what your teachers did to us? Jake worked 16-hour days to help save our house. Those teachers told the whole town he was lazy. They turned our family's sacrifice into their professional success story. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, * Jake, I'm watching the live stream from Millbrook. I'm so proud of you. But more than that, I'm proud of who you were at 17. You saved our family, and those teachers called you a failure, *. Patricia, I said, decision crystallizing, implement the Morrison Standard. Every district we work with gets reviewed for systematic bias. And Patricia? Make sure Henderson and Garrett's presentations are included in the case study materials. Done. Jake, you just changed education funding forever. I hung up and turned back to my parents, who were both crying now, not from sadness, but from something that looked like relief 15 years in the making. It's over, Mom whispered. It's finally over. But as more news vans arrived and the crowd grew larger, I realized this wasn't an ending at all. It was just the beginning. The next morning brought a reality I hadn't anticipated. My phone had died sometime around 3 a.m. from the constant barrage of notifications, and when I plugged it in at the hotel, the screen immediately lit up with 847 missed calls and over 2,000 text messages. The first call I returned was to Marcus, who sounded like he hadn't slept either. Jake, we have a situation that's both incredible and terrifying, he said without preamble. 17 school districts have called this morning requesting Morrison Foundation partnerships. But here's the kicker, 43 districts have also called to cancel existing partnerships. Cancel? Why would they cancel? Because they're scared, Jake. Word's gotten out about the Morrison Standard review process. Districts with questionable practices are jumping ship before we can audit them. 43 districts. That represented nearly $23 million in annual educational funding, vanishing overnight because administrators were afraid we'd discover their own versions of Henderson and Garrett. Marcus, that tells us everything we need to know about how widespread this problem is. It gets worse. 3 superintendents have reached out through back channels, essentially offering bribes to avoid Morrison's standard reviews. We're talking about systematic corruption here, not just isolated incidents. My hotel room door buzzed with the electronic lock. Room service with coffee I desperately needed. But when I opened the door, it wasn't hotel staff, it was Mrs. Henderson, looking like she'd aged a decade overnight. Jake, please. Just give me 5 minutes. She looked terrible, her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands shook as she gripped a manila folder. How did you get my room number? I know people at the hotel. Jake, I brought something I think you need to see. She held out the folder with trembling hands. It's everything. All the presentations, all the conferences, all the times we used your story. I took the folder, flipping it open to reveal dozens of printed PowerPoint slides, conference programs, and what looked like academic papers. All featuring variations of student JM and case study, at-risk dropout intervention failure. Jesus Christ, Catherine. You turned my life into a curriculum. I know, and I'm... God, Jake, I'm so sorry. But you have to understand, we genuinely believed we were helping other students by showing them what happens when you give up. Helping students by traumatizing them with my family's private struggles. She pulled out a specific document, a conference presentation from 2019 titled Long-Term Outcomes of Early Academic Abandonment, the JM case study 10 years later. The presentation included projected life outcomes, showing me as unemployed, likely struggling with addiction, and probably dependent on social services. You were still using my story last year, I said, disbelief coloring my voice. 28 years old, and you were still telling conference audiences that I was a failure. We didn't know, Jake. We had no idea what you'd accomplished. If we had known, you would have what? Suddenly developed basic human decency. I flipped through more pages, seeing my teenage trauma dissected in academic language across years of presentations. Catherine, you could have looked me up at any point. My company isn't exactly hidden. My phone rang, Rebecca from PR to Jake, emergency media briefing in 1 hour. Every major education publication wants comment on a federal investigation. Also. She paused. Also, we just got contacted by the families of 6 other students Henderson and Garrett used as cautionary tales over the years. They want to file a class action lawsuit. 6 other families. I looked at Mrs. Henderson, who had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. A class action lawsuit, she whispered, sinking into the hotel room's chair uninvited. My career, my pension, my reputation, it's all gone, isn't it? Catherine, did you really think there would be no consequences? You spent 15 years monetizing my trauma. You built conference presentations on the detailed humiliation of struggling teenagers. What did you think would happen when people found out? She pulled out her phone, showing me a screenshot of her Facebook page. Death threats, Jake. Hundreds of them. People are posting my home address, my daughter's workplace. Someone spray-painted child abuser on my house. The mob justice aspect made me uncomfortable, but I pushed the feeling aside. That's what happens when you become the cautionary tale, Catherine. Welcome to being publicly humiliated for your choices. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Patricia Kim at Stanford, *Jake, incredible development. We've identified 847 other cases nationwide of educators using specific student failures as recurring examples. This could be the largest education scandal in decades, *. 847 cases. We weren't dealing with isolated misconduct, we were looking at a systematic pattern of educators building careers on the detailed destruction of vulnerable students' dignity. Catherine, I said, showing her Dr. Kim's text, you and Richard aren't unique. You're part of something much bigger and much worse than I initially realized. She read the message, her face going gray. 800 cases. 847 documented cases of educators using student failures as professional development material. You just happened to pick the wrong dropout to exploit. Outside my hotel window, I could see news vans still gathered in the parking lot. The story was metastasizing beyond Millbrook, beyond individual teacher misconduct, into something that threatened to fundamentally reshape how we thought about educational accountability. Mrs. Henderson stood shakily. Jake, is there anything at all, I can do to make this right? I looked at her for a long moment, thinking about the 17-year-old boy who believed these teachers when they said he was worthless. Actually, Catherine, there is one thing you can do. You can help me document every single student you and Richard use this way. Every name, every story, every conference where you exploited someone's private struggles for your professional advancement. Mrs. Henderson's face went from gray to green. Jake, that would be hundreds of students over 20 years. Some of those cases involved genuinely confidential information, abuse situations, family crises, mental health struggles. Exactly. I set the folder of presentations on the hotel desk. You turn children's worst moments into your career highlights. Now you're going to help me make sure it never happens to another kid. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. If I do this, if I provide all those names and details, it won't just destroy my career. It could bring down half the education department. Richard, Principal Martinez from the middle school, even some district administrators. We all shared case studies. Good, I said simply. Maybe the next generation of educators will think twice before turning struggling students into conference entertainment. My phone rang again, this time it was Dr. Rodriguez. Jake, we have a crisis. The federal investigators arrived an hour ago and they're demanding access to 15 years of personnel files, student records, and conference materials. But here's the problem, we can't locate most of Henderson and Garrett's presentation files. I looked directly at Mrs. Henderson, who was still clutching what was clearly a fraction of the material she'd brought. Dr. Rodriguez, I think I might be able to help with that. It seems Mrs. Henderson has been doing some spring cleaning this morning. She's with you right now. Dr. Rodriguez's voice jumped an octave. Jake, you need to know, tampering with evidence in a federal investigation is a felony. If she's trying to destroy documentation. She's not destroying anything, I said, watching Catherine's face carefully. In fact, she's about to voluntarily provide complete records to both the federal investigators and Stanford's research team. Isn't that right, Catherine? The silence stretched for 30 seconds before she finally nodded. Yes. I'll provide everything. Everything meaning what, specifically? Every presentation, every conference, every case study we developed using student situations. Names, details, outcomes we projected versus actual results when we could track them. Her voice was barely a whisper. Jake, some of these kids, we got their life stories completely wrong. Not just you. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, * board meeting update, Morrison standard approved unanimously. Implementation begins immediately across all 847 current district partnerships. Estimated budget impact, $340 million in conditional funding, *. $340 million in educational funding now tied to districts proving they treated struggling students with basic human dignity. The financial pressure alone would force systematic changes across the entire industry. Catherine, I need you to understand something. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about preventing other 17-year-olds from sitting in restaurants 15 years from now, listening to their former teachers call them failures. She looked up, tears streaming down her face now. I know. God help me, I know what we did was wrong. But Jake, we genuinely thought we were helping. When students complained about homework or talked about dropping out, showing them real consequences seemed like good teaching. Real consequences, I repeated. You mean the consequences you invented? Because your projections about my life were completely fabricated, weren't they? We based them on statistical models for dropout outcomes. Statistical models. I pulled up the Morrison Tech website on my phone, showing her our latest press release about crossing the billion-dollar revenue threshold. How do your statistical models account for this, Catherine? She stared at the screen, probably seeing numbers that dwarfed her entire district's annual budget. They don't. The models don't account for students who succeed outside traditional pathways. My hotel room phone rang, the hotel's main line. Mr. Morrison, this is David Chen from the front desk. We have about 50 reporters in our lobby requesting interviews, and someone from the Department of Education is here with federal marshals asking about document preservation. Should I send them up? Federal marshals. This had escalated beyond anything I'd anticipated when I'd sat down for dinner at Romano's 18 hours ago. Send up the Department of Education representative. The reporters can wait. I hung up and looked at Mrs. Henderson, who was frantically texting on her phone. Catherine, who are you texting? Richard. And Principal Martinez. And the others who were involved in the case study presentations. She looked up, panic clear in her eyes. Jake, if the federal investigators get access to everything, it won't just be us. It'll be dozens of educators across 3 districts. How many people knew you were using specific student information in professional presentations? Everyone knew. The administration approved it, HR signed off on the conference travel, other teachers contributed cases from their own students. She was crying openly now. Jake, we turned child exploitation into a district-wide professional development strategy. The knock on my hotel room door came exactly when I expected it. Through the peephole, I could see a woman in a federal suit holding credentials, flanked by 2 serious-looking men who were definitely marshals. This was about to get much more complicated. I opened the hotel door to face Agent Sarah Martinez from the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, flanked by 2 federal marshals. Her expression was all business as she held up her credentials. Mr. Morrison, I'm Agent Martinez investigating civil rights violations at Millbrook District. I understand you have materials relevant to our case. Mrs. Henderson shot to her feet, the manila folder still clutched in her trembling hands. Agent Martinez, I'm Catherine Henderson. I brought these documents to Mr. Morrison voluntarily. Agent Martinez's eyes sharpened as she recognized the name. Mrs. Henderson. You're one of the subjects of our investigation. You should know that anything you say can be used in federal proceedings. I understand. I want to cooperate fully. Catherine held out the folder with shaking hands. This contains 15 years of presentations where we used confidential student information. Names, personal details, family situations, all of it unauthorized. Agent Martinez accepted the folder, quickly scanning the contents. Her expression grew grimmer with each page. Mrs. Henderson, this appears to document systematic violations of FERPA, possible Title IX violations, and exploitation of minor children's private information. Are you aware this could result in federal criminal charges? Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. But Agent Martinez, it wasn't just us. This was district policy. Administration approved it, HR signed off on it, other teachers contributed cases. We have documentation going back to 2003. How many students were affected? I pulled up Dr. Kim's research on my phone. Stanford's preliminary investigation identified 847 cases nationwide, but Mrs. Henderson just told me this involved dozens of educators across 3 districts in this region alone. Agent Martinez was taking rapid notes. Mrs. Henderson, I need you to understand, cooperation with this investigation could significantly impact any potential charges against you personally. Are you prepared to provide complete documentation and testimony? Yes. Everything. I have files at home, backup drives, email correspondence with other districts sharing case studies. Catherine's voice was barely audible. Agent Martinez, some of these children were in foster care, dealing with abuse, family homelessness. We documented their most private traumas and turned them into conference presentations. The room went dead silent except for Agent Martinez's pen scratching across her notepad. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, * Jake, CNN just reported that 23 school districts have now requested Morrison Foundation partnerships in the last hour. The Morrison Standard is forcing systematic change across the entire education industry, * 23 districts in 1 hour. Fear of losing funding was driving faster reform than decades of policy initiatives had achieved. Mrs. Henderson, I said quietly, I want you to know something. When I was 17, sitting in that guidance counselor's office listening to you and Mr. Garrett destroy my future, I believed every word you said. I thought I was worthless, that I'd never amount to anything, that my family was right to be ashamed of me. She looked up, her face crumbling. Jake, I'm so sorry. I'm not finished. My voice was steady now, 15 years of anger finally finding focus. You took a scared kid who was sacrificing his education to save his family's home, and you turned his trauma into your professional success story. You did this to hundreds of children over 2 decades. Agent Martinez was recording everything on her phone now. But here's what you never understood, Catherine. Those kids you wrote off. We didn't disappear. We didn't become statistics. We became entrepreneurs, nurses, mechanics, artists, parents, volunteers. We became human beings whose worth was never yours to determine. I stood up, decision crystallizing. Agent Martinez, I want to fund a complete investigation into this practice nationwide. Morrison Tech will provide whatever resources the Department of Education needs to identify every district, every educator, every child who was exploited this way. Mr. Morrison, that could be a multi-million-dollar commitment. Then we'll spend multiple millions. Because no other 17-year-old should ever have to spend 15 years believing they're worthless because their teachers needed conference material. Mrs. Henderson was sobbing now, but I felt something I hadn't expected, not satisfaction, but relief. The scared teenager who'd internalized their assessment was finally, truly free. Catherine, I said, your career is over. Your reputation is destroyed. You'll probably face federal charges. And you know what? You did this to yourself the moment you decided struggling children were raw material for your professional advancement. Agent Martinez closed her notepad. Mrs. Henderson, you'll need to report to our field office tomorrow morning with all remaining documentation. Mr. Morrison, we'll be in touch about your funding offer. As they left, I looked out the hotel window at the news vans below and smiled. The dropout they'd written off had just changed American education forever.